In 1946, a sharecropper's wife in Greenwood, Mississippi, used to cook for 12 every harvest season. By 1953, she was feeding two children on $4 a week in a one-room apartment on Chicago's South Side. The fields were gone. The garden was gone. She kept her family alive with 6 of the meals on this list. Number 14 cost her nothing because she carried the recipe in her head from a grandmother who never wrote anything down. Number 3 was what her children ate 5 mornings a week for 3 years straight. Number 9 was the only meal she trusted to stretch from Monday to Thursday. These 25 meals were not chosen. They were inherited by Black families who turned scarcity into something that tasted like your grandmother's kitchen. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count them down. Number 25, hoe cakes and molasses. This was the meal that kept Black families alive when there was nothing in the house but cornmeal and a jar of dark syrup. Cornmeal, water, a pinch of salt, fried on a mother's greased skillet until the edges turned golden. Enslaved people in Virginia cooked them on the flat blade of a garden hoe held over an open fire because they had no kitchen, no stove, no pan. After emancipation, the hoe was replaced by cast iron, but the recipe did not change. In the 1930s, sharecropper families in the Mississippi Delta ate hoe cakes with blackstrap molasses 3 times a day because the commissary sold cornmeal and molasses on credit and almost nothing else. A 10-pound sack of cornmeal cost 15 cents and lasted a family of 5 nearly 2 weeks. The molasses gave it sweetness and iron. The cornmeal gave it substance. Together, they gave your family 1 more day. That was the math. Number 24, potlikker and cornbread. When your grandmother finished simmering a pot of collard greens with a ham hock, the greens went to Sunday dinner, but the broth, that dark, smoky liquid left behind in the pot, that was the real treasure. Potlikker was loaded with vitamins A, C, and K, along with iron that leached from the greens during hours of slow cooking. Enslaved cooks on the South's plantations poured off this liquid after preparing meals for the families that held them in bondage and carried it back to their own quarters. They soaked cornbread in it until it fell apart, and that was supper. In the 1920s, sharecropper wives in Alabama served potlikker with crumbled cornbread to their children as a full meal 5 nights a week. For Black families, this was never a debate. It was dinner. Number 23, fatback and grits. If you grew up in a sharecropper's household in Georgia or South Carolina in the 1940s, your morning started the same way every day: a slice of fatback fried in a cast iron skillet until the edges curled and the grease pooled. Then a bowl of grits cooked in water with that rendered fat stirred through. Fatback cost almost nothing because white families did not want it. Butchers sold it for pennies a pound, and the salt preserved it for months. For Black children, this was breakfast every single day. Not sometimes, every day. The fat kept you full through hours of walking miles to the segregated school that had no cafeteria. Nutritionists would later call this diet deficient. The families who survived on it called it Tuesday. Number 22, neck bones and rice. Neck bones were the cut that nobody wanted. Butchers in Black neighborhoods sold them for 10 to 15 cents a pound in the 1950s because there was almost no meat on them. But your grandmother with a heavy pot and 4 hours of patience could turn 2 pounds of neck bones into a meal that fed 6 people. Brown them first, add water, onion, garlic, salt, and pepper, and let the pot simmer until the meat fell off the bone and the broth turned thick and dark with collagen. Served over white rice, it made your grandmother's kitchen smell like love and necessity in equal measure. Families who migrated to Chicago and Detroit brought this recipe north and cooked it in apartments where the only Southern thing left was the cast iron and the knowledge of what to do with a cheap cut of bone. The meat was almost nothing. The broth was everything. Number 21, ash cakes. Before hoe cakes, there were ash cakes. This was the oldest bread in Black American history. Cornmeal and water shaped into flat rounds and buried directly in the hot ashes of a fireplace. Susan Kelly, born into slavery in Virginia, was interviewed at the age of 100 in the 1930s and described her mother's method of raking the ashes aside, placing the cakes on hot bricks, then covering them with more ashes until they turned brown. You washed them off with water and ate them warm. That was it. After emancipation, ash cakes survived because many formerly enslaved families had no stove, no oven, and no money. A fireplace and a handful of cornmeal was all you needed. By the 1960s, the recipe had disappeared. The last generation that knew how to make them never thought to write it down. No one did. Number 20, crackling bread was breakfast that used every bit of the hog, including the crispy bits left after rendering lard. Cracklings, those crunchy pieces of fried pork skin and fat, were folded into cornbread batter before baking. The result was cornbread studded with pockets of salty, chewy richness that made plain bread into something special. Children searched for the crackling pieces in their slices, savoring each bite of crispy pork among the cornmeal. This bread required nothing extra on top because the fat was already baked inside. Families who raised their own hogs had cracklings available after butchering, and nothing was ever wasted. The bread came from the oven fragrant and golden. This was poverty food that tasted like abundance, turning scraps into something worth anticipating. Crackling bread carried heritage in every bite. Number 19, chitterling stew transformed pig intestines into something that divided families. You either loved it or couldn't stand the smell. The chitterlings required hours of cleaning before they could be cooked, a process that tested patience but rewarded dedication. Once cleaned, they were simmered with onions, garlic, vinegar, and hot peppers until tender and flavorful. Some cooks added potatoes or tomatoes to stretch the stew. The aroma was distinctive and powerful, announcing to the entire neighborhood what was cooking. For many families, chitterling stew was holiday food served at Christmas or New Year's alongside other traditional dishes. Children grew up with strong opinions about this stew, shaped by whether their families embraced or avoided it. The dish represented cultural continuity, a connection to ancestors who wasted nothing. Number 18, sugar water bread. In the poorest Black households during the Depression, when even cornmeal ran out, mothers made a bread from flour, water, and a spoonful of sugar. No yeast, no eggs, no milk. Just those three things baked in whatever was available. It was not good. Nobody pretended it was good, but it stopped the child from crying at night because their stomach was empty. In sharecropper camps across the Arkansas Delta, families ate sugar water bread for days at a stretch during the months between planting and harvest when no wages came. A social worker's report in 1935 documented a family of 7 in Coahoma County, Mississippi, living on sugar water bread and black coffee for 11 straight days. The mother told her she prayed every morning that the bread would last until evening. That was the scope of her hope. Number 17, black-eyed peas and rice. In the South, this was not just New Year's Day luck. This was Wednesday, Thursday, and whatever day came after. Dry black-eyed peas simmered with a ham hock and onion, salt, and pepper until the peas turned creamy and the broth went thick. Served over rice, it became the most complete meal a poor Black family could afford. A 1-pound bag cost 15 cents in the 1940s and fed your family for 2 days. The ham hock, often reused across 3 or 4 pots, cost a dime. In the Gullah Geechee communities along the Carolina coast, this dish was called Hoppin' John, and its roots trace back to West African rice and bean dishes carried across the Atlantic by enslaved people. The rice was not incidental. West Africans were specifically enslaved to work Carolina rice plantations because they already knew how to cultivate it. They fed their enslavers with their own knowledge, then fed themselves with the cheapest version of the same grain. That was the cruelty and the genius in one pot. Number 16, pig feet stew. If your grandmother cooked pig feet, you knew them by the smell before you walked through the door. A pig foot cost almost nothing because white America considered it waste, but simmered for 4 hours with onions, vinegar, salt, and red pepper flakes. Those feet released enough collagen to turn the broth into a rich, gelatinous stew that stuck to your ribs and did not let go. In black neighborhoods across Memphis, Atlanta, and New Orleans, pig feet sat in glass jars on the counters of corner stores and barbershops. For families surviving on sharecropper wages, pig feet were one of the few animal proteins you could afford regularly. A woman who grew up in Macon, Georgia in the 1940s remembered her grandmother buying 6 pig feet every Saturday for a quarter and making a stew that lasted until Wednesday. 40 years later, that smell still meant Saturday to her. The feet that were meant to be thrown away became the foundation of your weekly ritual. Number 15, cold collared sandwiches packed leftover greens between bread for lunches that provided vitamins and fiber. Families cooked large batches of collards with smoked meat, then saved portions for next day's meals. The greens were squeezed to remove excess liquid, seasoned with hot sauce or vinegar, and spread between bread slices. The flavor was earthy and slightly bitter, the potlikker having concentrated overnight. Workers carried these knowing the greens provided nutrition that bread alone could never offer. Children ate them without complaint because collards were familiar. The taste of Sunday dinner transformed into Monday lunch. The sandwiches traveled well because greens stayed flavorful cold. This lunch represented practical genius of stretching one meal into 2, ensuring that labor of cooking collards fed families multiple times. Number 14, streak-o-lean and beans. Streak-o-lean was a cut of salt-cured pork belly with thin ribbons of meat running through the fat, cheaper even than bacon. You sliced it thin, fried it until crisp, and served it alongside a pot of pinto beans that had been simmering all day. In the 1930s, streak-o-lean sold for 8 cents a pound. Dried pinto beans cost a nickel. For 13 cents, a mother could feed a family of 6 a hot supper that stuck with you until morning. Her children did not know it was a poverty meal. They thought it was just what Monday tasted like. When your family talks about the meals they miss, they are not missing the ingredients. They are missing the person who made 13 cents feel like enough. Here is what the sharecropping system did to Black families that you need to understand. It did not just limit what you could eat, it controlled what you could grow. Plantation owners required sharecroppers to plant cotton and nothing else. If you planted a garden, you risked losing your tenancy. If you raised chickens without permission, the landowner could take them. The system was designed to make your family dependent on the commissary store, where prices were double what they charged in town and every purchase was added to a debt that never shrank. That is why these meals are so narrow. Not because Black families lack creativity, because the system restricted your options to the space between what was allowed and what was needed. Then number 13, bean pie. In 1930, Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam introduced the bean pie as a deliberate act of culinary independence. Navy beans, cooked soft, blended with sugar, butter, eggs, cinnamon, and nutmeg, and baked in a pie crust. It was designed to replace sweet potato pie, which Muhammad considered a relic of the slave diet. By the 1960s, bow-tied men selling bean pies on street corners became one of the most recognizable images in black urban neighborhoods, from Harlem to Watts. A single pie cost less than $1 to make. The finished product tasted rich, warm, and spiced in a way that surprised anyone who expected something plain. The bean pie was never just dessert, it was an argument. It said that black people could choose what they ate, not just accept what was handed to them. For your family, choosing your own food was an act of freedom that started in the kitchen. That mattered. Number 12, sweet potato pone. This was the dessert of people who could not afford sugar or flour. Sweet potatoes grated, mixed with molasses and a pinch of cinnamon, spread in a greased pan and baked until the top turned dark and caramelized. Dense, sticky, and deeply satisfying. Enslaved families made sweet potato pone because sweet potatoes were one of the few crops they could grow in their garden plots. After emancipation, women baked the pone in covered cast iron skillets set near a fire. By the 1950s, sweet potato pie had overtaken it in popularity, and the older recipe faded. But the women who made it remembered the taste the way you remember your grandmother's hands. Dense and dark and honest, a dessert that asked for nothing you did not already have in the ground behind your house. Number 11, chicken gizzard stew turned an often discarded organ into something families genuinely looked forward to eating. Gizzards were cheap at the butcher counter, sold by the pound for far less than other chicken parts. They required long cooking to become tender, but that time transformed their chewy texture into something almost silky. The gizzards were browned first, then simmered with onions, garlic, tomatoes, and potatoes until everything melded together. Some cooks added carrots or celery, while others kept it simple with salt, pepper, and bay leaves. The gravy that formed was dark and rich, perfect for ladling over rice or biscuits. Children who grew up eating this stew developed a taste for organ meats early. The dish represented kitchen wisdom, knowledge that parts others threw away could become dinner. Number 10, fried corn mush, made from leftover breakfast grits that would otherwise go to waste. Families poured leftover grits into pans to set overnight, then sliced the firm mixture into squares and fried them golden the next morning. These cakes could be eaten hot for breakfast or packed cold for midday meals, their dense texture holding up through hours in lunch pails. The process transformed cheap cornmeal into something more substantial than porridge. Workers carried grits cakes knowing they would fill hungry stomachs when no other food was available. Some families added bacon or cheese when affordable, but plain grits cakes provided satisfying carbohydrates without additions. The technique represented kitchen wisdom passed between generations of black women who understood creativity conquered poverty. Number 9, sardines and crackers. A tin of sardines cost a nickel in the 1940s. A sleeve of saltines cost a few cents more. Together, they made the fastest, cheapest meal you could carry into a factory or a cotton field. You opened the tin, laid the sardines on the crackers, and ate standing up. For black men working double shifts in northern steel mills during the Great Migration, sardines and crackers was lunch, sometimes dinner, sometimes both. In the Jim Crow South, black travelers carried tins of sardines because restaurants refused to serve you and rest stops closed their doors. A generation of black children grew up watching their fathers eat sardines over the kitchen sink after a 12-hour shift. It was not a memory of poverty. It was a memory of a man too tired to sit down, but too stubborn to skip a meal. Here is something about the Great Migration that changes how you understand every meal on this list. Between 1916 and 1970, 6 million Black Americans left the South. They left because Jim Crow made life unbearable. They left because sharecropping was a debt trap disguised as farming. But when they arrived in Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia, the food was different. The cornmeal was degerminated, stripped of flavor. The pork came wrapped in plastic, and the prices were higher than anything you had paid in Mississippi. So your family adapted. They found the cheapest cuts at unfamiliar butcher shops. They grew collards in window boxes. They carried recipes in their heads across 800 miles and cooked them in kitchens the size of closets. Every meal that survived the migration did so because someone refused to let it die. Not because it was easy to find the right cornmeal or the right cut of pork in a northern city that did not understand your food. Because giving up the food meant giving up the last thread connecting your kitchen to the one your mother kept 800 miles south. That thread was thin, but it held. And for 6 million people, that thread was the difference between a new city that felt like a home and a new city that felt like an exile. The meals survived because the people who made them decided that home was not a place. Home was a pot on the stove. Number 8, leftover rice balls transformed yesterday's dinner into today's portable lunch. Families shaped cold rice into firm balls, sometimes adding bits of meat or vegetables, then wrapped them in cloth for transport. The rice held together when properly packed, creating a self-contained meal requiring no bread or utensils. In Gullah communities along the Carolina coast, rice was the staple grain at every meal. Leftover rice was never wasted because it could always become tomorrow's lunch. Workers carried rice balls in pockets or pails, eating them by hand during breaks. Children found them easier to manage than sandwiches, the compact shape fitting small hands. The technique came from African foodways where rice balls had sustained travelers for generations. This lunch connected Black Americans to ancestral wisdom about stretching grain. Number 7, cabbage and smoked meat stew was economical brilliance, stretching a single ham hock or smoked neck bone into a meal that filled the whole family. The cabbage was chopped roughly and added to a pot where smoked meat had already been simmering, releasing its salty, smoky essence into the broth. Potatoes often joined partway through, adding substance and absorbing flavor. Onions, garlic, and black pepper were the only seasonings needed. The smoked meat did most of the work. This stew was cold weather food made when temperatures dropped and appetites grew. The cabbage became silky and sweet, nothing like the raw vegetable that went into the pot. Children who claimed to dislike cabbage often asked for seconds. It represented simple cooking alchemy, transforming inexpensive vegetables into something families craved. Number 6, fried fish cakes transformed small catches and leftover fish into portable lunches that traveled well and satisfied hunger. Families near rivers or coastal waters caught small fish, boiled them tender, then mashed the flesh with cornmeal and seasoning before frying into patties. These cakes could be made from fish too small for proper meals, stretching modest catches into food for entire families. The cornmeal binder extended protein, while frying created a crust that protected the interior during transport. Workers carried fish cakes in lunch pails or wrapped in newspaper, eating them cold hours after cooking. Coastal Black communities perfected these recipes over generations, understanding that water provided free protein for those willing to fish. The cakes represented skill and survival, transforming minimal resources into real meals. Number 5, poke salad. Poke salad was not a salad. It was cooked pokeweed, a wild plant that grew along roadsides and fences across the South. You picked the young leaves in spring boiled them 3 times in fresh water to remove the toxins, then sauteed them in bacon grease with onion and a cracked egg. For Black families who could not afford store-bought vegetables, poke was nutrition that grew free in the ditches. In the 1930s, families in Mississippi and Arkansas picked pokeweed the way you pick blackberries, as a seasonal bounty that cost nothing. You did not need a garden or a landowner's permission. It grew everywhere. By the 1980s, knowledge of how to safely prepare pokeweed had faded. The plant is poisonous if not cooked properly, and without your grandmother to teach the triple boil, the recipe became too dangerous to pass down. A free meal that required knowledge instead of money. When the knowledge left, the meal left with it. Number 4, tomato gravy and biscuits. You fried a little fatback until the grease pooled, added a can of tomatoes and a spoonful of flour, and stirred until the mixture thickened into a tangy, peppery, reddish gravy. Poured over split biscuits, it made your mother's kitchen smell like abundance. In the 1930s, tomato gravy was a staple in Black households across the Piedmont region of the Carolinas and Georgia. Home-canned tomatoes lasted through winter, and flour for biscuits was one of the few cheap items at the commissary. A full breakfast cost less than 5 cents. A woman in Durham, North Carolina's tobacco country, who worked as a domestic servant in the 1940s, made tomato gravy for her own children every morning before leaving for work at 5 a.m. She cooked for a wealthy household all day, serving food she could never afford to bring home. Then she came back and made gravy from a can of tomatoes. That gap between the food she cooked for others and the food she fed her own family was the entire economy of Jim Crow in one skillet. Number 3, rice and gravy. In Black households across Louisiana and Mississippi, rice and gravy was the meal that appeared when everything else had been exhausted. You cooked a pot of white rice, you made a gravy from whatever drippings or broth was in the kitchen, thickened with flour. The gravy went over the rice. That was your family's dinner. A 25-pound bag of rice cost less than $1 in the 1950s and lasted nearly a month. Gravy could be made from almost nothing. A spoonful of saved bacon grease, the liquid left from cooking beans, even water and flour browned in a pan. A man who grew up in Baton Rouge in the 1960s said his family ate rice and gravy 4 nights a week during the months his father was between jobs. He did not realize they were poor until he visited a friend's house and saw that other families ate meat with their rice. That realization that what your family called dinner was what the world called poor was the quiet wound that poverty meals left behind. Nobody told you. You just figured it out. Number 2, commodity cheese soup. In the 1960s and 1970s, the federal government distributed surplus food to low-income families. The most recognizable item was a 5-pound block of bright orange processed cheese. Black families in the rural South and in urban housing projects received this cheese alongside powdered milk and dried beans. It did not melt the way regular cheese melted, but sliced thin and dissolved into a pot of milk with diced potatoes, salt, and pepper. It became a soup that was thick, warm, and impossibly creamy. If you grew up on commodity cheese soup in the 1970s, you remember the taste with a specificity that borders on devotion. It tasted like government and survival, and your mother figuring out what to do with ingredients that were given, never chosen. Black mothers took those 5-pound blocks and made them into something their children asked for by name. That is the story of every meal on this list. Ingredients chosen by someone else turned into love by someone who had no other option. Number 1, pan drippings bread. This was the meal at the absolute bottom. the last meal before no meal at all. After frying whatever meat your family had, the skillet's grease was saved in a tin can on the back of the stove. When there was nothing left, a mother would heat those drippings, soak stale bread in the warm fat, and serve it to her children with a sprinkle of salt. In the 1930s, Black families in the Mississippi Delta reported eating pan drippings bread for weeks at a time. It contained almost no nutrition beyond calories, but it stopped hunger. And for a mother watching her children go thin, stopping hunger was enough. A social worker in Selma, Alabama, in 1936 documented a woman who fed 3 children on pan drippings bread for 19 days while her husband walked to Birmingham looking for work. When he came back with $4, the first thing she bought was cornmeal. The second was a can of molasses, and she made hoe cakes. The last meal on this list circled back to the first, because that is how poverty works. It is not a line, it is a loop.
Fried cornbread patties made from hot water bread were the quick, crispy breakfast that came together in minutes. Perfect for busy mothers who needed to feed many children before the day rushed in. Flour and cornmeal met boiling water until the mixture thickened into a dough that could be shaped right in the palm. The patties hit the skillet with a sizzle, frying in a thin layer of oil or bacon grease until the edges crisped and the centers stayed soft. Kids loved the sound as much as the taste. They begged for them with butter, with jelly, with a drizzle of cane syrup, or just plain hot from the skillet. These patties were the kind of food that taught children to appreciate texture. Crisp outside, tender inside, warm all the way through. Mothers made them without measuring because the recipe lived in their fingers, and every batch tasted slightly different depending on how much water or meal went in. Fried cornbread patties were fast, reliable, and comforting, the kind of breakfast that made sure no child walked out the door hungry. Even when grocery shelves brought new kinds of bread and packaged mixes, nothing matched the flavor of these simple patties eaten at the kitchen table while the morning light crept in. They tasted like survival, love, and tradition, all pressed into a single handful. Today, many children have never seen them cooked, but those who remember can still taste that first bite. The warmth, the crunch, the feeling of being cared for before the day even started. Smoked frog legs provided unexpected protein from the marshes and bayous surrounding many southern plantations. Skilled foragers caught frogs at night with simple nets or by hand, cleaning the meaty hind legs and seasoning them with salt and wild herbs before smoking them slowly over hickory coals. The gentle smoke preserved the meat for days and gave it a rich, savory flavor that paired well with cornbread or greens. This practice echoed West African traditions of smoking small game and fish to ensure longevity in hot climates. After emancipation, smoked frog legs remained a regional delicacy in Louisiana and coastal communities, later becoming a celebrated dish in Cajun cuisine. They remind us that survival often required deep familiarity with the waterways and a willingness to turn overlooked resources into sustaining meals. Smoked frog legs stand as an example of how necessity and skill created flavors that outlasted hardship, transforming what began as a pragmatic hunt into a distinctive part of Southern culinary heritage and a taste still enjoyed today. Smothered breakfast potatoes were the skillet hero of 1960s mornings, a dish that stretched a handful of ingredients into something big enough to feed everyone. Mothers sliced the potatoes thin, letting them hit the hot grease before adding onions, peppers, salt, and a little black pepper for heat. The skillet hissed, the house filled with the scent of frying potatoes, and sleepy children wandered into the kitchen even before they were called. The potatoes softened and browned, edges crisping, onions turning sweet, and the peppers melting into the mix. This was a breakfast you could eat alone or beside eggs, biscuits, or sausage, and it never disappointed. Mothers loved it because it was dependable and cheap. Children loved it because it tasted like comfort, disguised as something simple. A plate of smothered potatoes could fuel a child until lunch, carrying them through long mornings at school or long walks down dusty roads. Over the years, frozen hash browns and faster options took its place, but nothing compares to the taste of potatoes cooked slow in a cast-iron skillet by a mother who knew exactly when to turn them. For those who remember, one spoonful brings back the sound of sizzling grease and the warmth of a kitchen where breakfast meant love made visible. Sweet rice pudding with raisins was the dessert that turned a handful of leftover rice into something that felt like a gift at the Christmas table. Mothers heated the rice slowly with milk, sugar, butter, and warm spices until it thickened into a creamy, fragrant pot that sent comfort drifting through the kitchen. Raisins, often saved for holidays, were stirred in last, plumping into soft little bursts of sweetness. Children loved watching them swell and surface, treating each spoonful like a treasure hunt. The pudding tasted warm, gentle, and deeply soothing, the kind of dessert you ate slowly just to make the moment last. For families with little money, this dish proved that creativity mattered more than ingredients. Mothers knew it filled hungry stomachs and warmed cold winter mornings, stretching what they had into something memorable. It was served in bowls passed around the table, steaming and sweet, with cinnamon dusted lightly over the top when the budget allowed. Everyone from the youngest child to the oldest grandparent took comfort in its familiar taste. Long after the holidays, people remembered how rice pudding made the house smell like cinnamon and hope. Sweet rice pudding with raisins tasted like warmth, resourcefulness, and Christmas sweetness created from almost nothing. Fried apples with cinnamon turned ordinary mornings into something that felt like a holiday. Mothers sliced apples thin and let them cook down slowly in a skillet with butter or a little bacon grease, adding cinnamon and sugar until the whole mixture turned glossy and tender. The apples softened into something warm and sweet, the kind of side that made every child push their plate closer. Fried apples tasted like dessert disguised as breakfast, and they paired with everything: pancakes, biscuits, grits, or sausage. Kids begged for them because they made the house smell like comfort from the moment the skillet warmed. Even on the tightest weeks, apples were easy to find, and a handful of cinnamon could stretch the flavor far over time. Store-bought pastries replaced skillet fruits, and fried apples slipped away. But anyone who remembers eating them fresh knows they tasted like love cooked slow. Banana pudding with wafers was the chilled Christmas treasure children could barely wait for, especially when they knew it had been sitting in the fridge all night, getting better by the hour. Mothers layered vanilla wafers, sliced bananas, and warm homemade pudding in deep glass dishes, each layer sinking just slightly as the wafers softened into cake-like sweetness. The bowl went into the refrigerator covered tightly, and from that moment on, children opened the fridge door every 20 minutes just to look. By the next day, the pudding had turned silky, the bananas had sweetened, and the wafers had transformed into soft, creamy layers that tasted like pure comfort. When the dish was lifted out for Christmas dinner, everyone leaned in closer, waiting for the spoon to reveal that first perfect scoop. The smell alone, warm vanilla and banana, felt like a holiday hug. It was the dessert that never lasted long because children asked for seconds before their plates even touched the table. Banana pudding tasted like patience rewarded, Christmas excitement, and the magic of a dessert that only got better overnight. Hot buttered grits with sugar or cheese were the quiet heartbeat of many 1960s. Black kitchens, the kind of breakfast that slid into a bowl steaming and soft before the sun was fully up. Mothers stirred the pot slowly, scraping the bottom so nothing stuck, adding butter until it melted into the grains like sunlight sinking into snow. Every child had a favorite version. Some begged for sugar because it made the bowl taste like dessert, warm and sweet and comforting on rushed school mornings. Others loved cheese melted in until the grits turned golden and stretchy, sticking to the spoon in a way that made the dish feel special. Even when money was tight, grits were cheap, filling, and steady, the kind of food that made sure no one walked out the door hungry. They tasted like warmth, like routine, like the kind of love that showed up before sunrise without ever being spoken aloud. As boxed cereals and toaster pastries crept into households, hot buttered grits started to slip out of daily life. But the memory never quite faded. Anyone who grew up eating them can still remember the heavy spoon, the soft steam hitting their face, the way Mama would say, "Eat this first so you do not get hungry in class." One bowl was enough to carry a child through a long bus ride, a long school day, and sometimes a long walk home. It was breakfast built from care, tradition, and the need to stretch ingredients as far as they could go. And even now, one taste can bring back the sound of a kitchen waking up and the comfort of a mother moving quietly through the morning to make sure her children started the day with something warm in their stomachs. Cocktail meatballs simmered in grape jelly and chili sauce created sweet, savory bites that children couldn't resist, the glossy sauce coating each meatball like candy while delivering unexpected flavors. Mothers would brown frozen meatballs in skillets before transferring them to slow cookers or pots where they simmered in a mixture of grape jelly and bottled chili sauce that melted together into a thick, shiny glaze. The combination sounded strange but tasted magical, the grape jelly's sweetness balancing the chili sauce's tang and creating a flavor profile that kept people reaching for more. As the meatballs simmered, they absorbed the sauce and became tender, the exterior developing a sticky coating that made them perfect for spearing with toothpicks. In Black households during the 1970s, these cocktail meatballs represented easy elegance, a recipe that seemed fancy but required minimal effort. Children loved them because they were bite-sized, required no cutting, and tasted like a sweet, savory treat. Fluffy biscuits with syrup or jelly were the breakfast treat 1960s kids begged for with wide eyes and hopeful voices, knowing their mother could see straight through them but might give in anyway. These biscuits were not the kind that popped out of a can. They were soft, hand-mixed, cut by a jar or a tin cup, and baked until their tops turned the faintest shade of gold. When they came out of the oven, the whole kitchen smelled like butter and warmth, the kind of smell that made children hover around the stove waiting for permission to grab one. Mothers split them open with their fingers, steam curling into the air, then drizzled syrup or spread jelly inside until the biscuits soaked up every bit of sweetness. Sometimes the syrup ran down the sides, and kids licked it from their hands without hesitation. These biscuits felt like a weekend, even on a weekday, like a celebration even when money was too tight for fancy breakfasts. Mothers made them because they filled stomachs and stretched ingredients, but children loved them because they tasted like happiness before school. As frozen biscuits and fast mornings took over, these tender homemade biscuits started to disappear. But for the generation who grew up on them, one bite still carries the memory of a warm kitchen, a busy mother moving with practiced grace, and the pure joy of getting the first biscuit straight from the pan. Homemade cane. Syrup drizzle once gave biscuits and pancakes a dark, smoky sweetness unmatched by refined sugar. Families would harvest sugarcane, crush the stalks, and boil the juice in large iron kettles until it thickened into a rich amber syrup. The work was hot and sticky, often stretching from dawn until late night, but the reward was a flavor that defined Southern breakfasts and holiday treats. Children watched the bubbling kettles with wide eyes, waiting for a chance to taste the warm syrup on a fresh biscuit. Neighbors often shared the labor and the finished product, turning the syrup-making into a community event as well as a culinary one. Over time, industrial sweeteners and store-bought syrups replaced the careful craft, and the knowledge of how to coax sweetness from cane faded with older generations. For those who remember, a spoonful of homemade cane syrup is more than a taste. It is a memory of family unity, hard work, and the sweetness that perseverance can bring.
Here's my challenge to you. Make one of these this week, not the commodity cheese or the pan drippings bread. Pick one your grandmother might have known. The potlikker and cornbread, the neck bones and rice. Then sit down at your table. Set a place, eat it slow, because these 25 meals were never about being poor. They were about refusing to disappear. Every hoe cake fried in a sharecropper cabin, every pot of beans stretched across a week, every can of sardines eaten standing up was an act of survival inside a system designed to grind Black families into nothing. Tell me in the comments which one your family made. Tell me which one you are going to try. I want to know if the chitlins still carry that weight. I want to know if someone out there still makes ash cakes. Now, I am not a doctor, and I am not telling you to eat the way your great-grandmother ate, but I am telling you that she knew something about feeding a family that no grocery store algorithm will ever understand. Because these are not just recipes, they are proof that Black families took the least and made the most, and that the simplest meal cooked in the hardest time can still be an act of dignity.